Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Positively Connected in Dogs. Today, I'm joined with a special guest, a fellow dog trainer and Malamute enthusiast, Mary Swinyer of Modar Dog Training. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Chelsea.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Malamutes and training and what things might be different. We're both very passionate about the breed, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we're hopefully going to answer some of your questions that you guys have and kind of go over some of the basics. This is going to be interactive. So if you guys do have questions for us, please feel free to drop them into the comments and we'll be sure to get to them. And hopefully we'll shed some light about living with Malamutes and how to do it peacefully and positively. So Mary, to get us started, do you mind telling us a little bit about how long you've owned Malamutes and kind of how they came into your life?
I got my first Malamute in 1994, after admiring the breed for about a decade. And numbers 2, 3, and 4 came in 2004, 2007, and 2011. I had originally seen them at a dog show. And in the benching areas, they were talking and making neat noises and saying things like, I love you, and mama, and so we admired them there. And then I actually was lucky enough to see a local Malamute breeder with her dog in the performance ring in utility. But like I say, I think it was about a decade before we actually got our first Malamute.
Well, and seeing them in the performance ring is not something that you see often. So that was a pretty cool experience to see.
Yes.
So how did training come into your life? Because you're also a professional trainer and own your own dog training business. So how did you get started with that?
So I've actually always, since I was a little girl, I've always trained animals. I was naturally born into it. I trained our family dogs until I got my own dog when I was 11. And just like by demonstrations I'd seen and instinct, I don't know. When I was 13, I saddle trained a young horse, following a book. And that was my first horse. We bought, a 13-year-old girl, we bought a 2.5-year-old stud colt. And then I got another young horse when I was 16, and I managed to, saddle train them and just loved animals and working with animals and training. And I didn't get involved in formal obedience training and classes until we adopted our Golden in 1990. And she was adopted through a combination of the breed rescue and local humane society. And part of the adoption contract agreement was to attend training classes, which was fantastic, which was the best thing that could have happened to me. So 1990 was my formal introduction to training. And of course I was hooked, and they couldn't get rid of me. And I started assisting, and then eventually instructing and attending educational seminars, training and behavior seminars.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's a common story amongst a lot of really passionate animal people is, always having that drive from a young age. I too started with horses and dogs and dog training. And so it's always nice to kind of see that transition from one species to another, because I do think that it really gives you, a different perspective in training, because training Malamutes, people generally think of Malamutes as being, stubborn or hard-headed. And a lot of the times people will resort to punitive-based methods, which of course we're going to talk about today. But I think that working with bigger animals, especially horses, kind of gives you a new perspective for that, because you can't force a horse to do something they don't want to do. They are so much bigger than us. And so it can give you a unique perspective about teaching the learner, whether it's a horse or a dog or even a human, a client of ours, how to be a part of that learning process, in a kind, and caring way. And I think that's cool that you had that same upbringing. And I love too that you, of course, are involved in performance sports with your dogs. You know, as Malamute lovers, we do need to keep those brains working. But like you mentioned, seeing one in the performance ring, that's not something you're going to see at every dog show that you go to. They're not the stereotypical performance dog, but they definitely have lots of skills that if we just take the time to work with them, they can do a whole bunch of things. So, you know, I do fast cat with mine. We do dog powered sports. We do rally and obedience, conformation, nose work, barn hunt. You know, they really can do all of the things. And I know that you've done quite a bit of that with your dogs too. So talk to us about some of the sports and activities that you and your dogs are involved in.
So I started with obedience and purchased my first Malamute as my next obedience dog, which my trainer friends thought I was nuts, but why would you get a Malamute for a performance dog? And so that was before there was rally, and so as things came along, so I started with obedience and agility, and then moved into rally and nose work, and I've done barn hunt and lure coursing and freestyle and what am I missing? You know, a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
very little confirmation, but a little bit of confirmation, and and then the working kinds of things. You know, backpacking and karting, and I don't live where there's snow, so we sled on wheels.
Yep, us too.
And weight pull, like I say, a little bit of everything, just whatever we wanted to try and enjoyed, we continued with.
Yeah, I think that's great too. And all of those things done with positive reinforcement training, which is huge. You know, I think that one thing that people in our breed that maybe aren't used to the breed can run into is that they are a little bit different. They do have all that energy. They do have all of that, you know, adventure seeking inside them, but they're not quite the same to train as, say, a golden retriever that can do a million different repetitions all day long and is super connected right off the bat and willing to please, you know, and our Malamutes are a little bit different. And so I think sometimes people can misinterpret and misunderstand that behavior, so they don't know what they're looking at. So again, for everyone watching, if you guys have questions about your Malamute and Malamute training, please feel free to drop those into the comments. And Mary, I'd love to get started kind of breaking down some of those misconceptions so that we can kind of educate people as to some of the stuff they're looking at. So the first one, of course, that I have to start off with is that lots of people say that you have to be the alpha or be the boss of a Malamute to really show them who is in control. So Mary, is that true or is that false? We need to be alpha over our dog.
Well, obviously I'm an alpha. You got a 102-pound girl training a 1,000-pound horse.
Yeah.
So there's so many flaws with the alpha theory. One being that aggression begets aggression, and whatever species, I don't care, you know, if you're talking about people or what. So I'm going to try and look at my cheat sheet here, if that's okay, and pretend I'm not putting glasses on. So one of the things that I've seen come about from that, you know, dominance theory, confrontational training methods, is that you're likely to see the same type of behaviors surface in probably the human, but the dog, the animal that they're used on. And it might not show up on the person who's doing that type of training, but a spouse, a child, other animals in the house. So it surprises me. Just the other day, someone contacted me about a friend who was choosing a trainer and a style or method of training, and you know, and I go look at the website, and it almost shocks me today that that some of this is still around.
Yeah.
Obviously, all of us are going to have our differences in training and little differences, but when it's big major things, some websites I just look at and shudder. How could anybody look at that? And is that the relationship you want with your dog? Why do you want a dog?
Yeah.
They're my friends and my partners, and part of the family, and I want a relationship of mutual trust and respect.
Yeah.
Not where, yes, I'm the leader. It's like, being the parent. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I think that's really important. I think that unfortunately in our current time, a lot of that misinformation and mistreatment of animals kind of became mainstream with, some television programs that have been popular. And so that kind of normalized that treatment, and people saw a professional doing it on TV and thought, well, goodness, like that must be okay. And that must be how we do it. And it's not, and it doesn't need to be. I think a lot of people too don't necessarily, they use that terminology of alpha and being the boss, but they don't even necessarily know where it came from. And it came from, which you and I know, a study by a Swiss animal behaviorist who was actually studying domesticated wolves. And he found that wolves, when they were domesticated in containment, would form a strict social hierarchy, and there would be one dog that would be, what you would call an alpha. And then he later came back and said that that's actually not true for wolves out in the wild, that it was just wolves that were taken out of their normal habitat. And people, I think, kind of took that information and misapplied it to animals, and then misapplied it from the human relationship to the dog relationship. And so it's kind of scary how that kind of stuff can happen, but alpha theory has been scientifically debunked, and the way that we interact with our animals does not and should not be based on showing them who is boss. Now, one word that you brought up that I kind of have mixed feelings about is leader, because I think that can be misused too.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I said one word that you brought up that can sometimes be misused along with alpha theory is being the leader. And I think that it's important to know that just because we're using positive reinforcement training techniques does not mean that our dogs run all over us. We are still a leader because we're bringing them all the good things. We bring them toys, we bring them food, we bring them a good and trusting relationship. So I think it's important for everyone to kind of understand where all that comes from and know that, first of all, scientifically debunked, we don't apply that theory to our animals anymore. And then I love what you said about the relationship. Why do you want a dog in your life? Well, I think a lot of people want dogs and Malamutes in their lives because they enjoy their company, and we love them and we want to spend our lives with them. And so we need to figure out better ways to kind of communicate with them. So obviously we're using positive reinforcement training methods, but a lot of people who use positive methods think that, it means we're permissive. It means that we allow a lot of inappropriate behavior from our dogs, which is not true. A lot of people, I think, want to know, well, what do I do when my dog does something bad? Right? So Mary, talk to us a little bit about kind of the basics of learning and how we use reinforcement and what we do if the dog makes a mistake.
Okay, can I back up just a second? You were talking about kind of terminology. I think a big problem is misinterpretation or misunderstanding of terminology. I've been doing this for a long time, about 30 years. So I don't have a problem with some of the maybe older, outdated terminology, but it's in how my definition of it. Mm-hmm. And so many times people, I think, have, misinterpreted and understand it completely differently. Yeah. I don't see some of the words that are now politically incorrect, or I don't see the words as bad. It's
how we define them.
Yeah. So, um, I've never been a purely positive extremist who doesn't set limits or boundaries, um, um, have, clear, consistent rules and structure to prevent rehearsal of unwanted behaviors. Good management have always been an important part of training and life with dogs. I believe structure builds confidence, and dogs thrive on structure.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that it's leadership and guidance, or like parenting. My son was young when I really started getting seriously involved in training. And as the more I got involved in training, I thought, wow, I wish I had done this a lot sooner, and would have been a better parent, have better understanding initially starting out. Not that kids are dogs and dogs are kids, because they aren't, and dogs aren't furry little kids. They have their own, species specific needs. But I'm trying to remember what.
So when we're talking about training, one thing you brought up is reinforcement. Of course, when we're doing positive reinforcement, it means that we are reinforcing our dogs for all of the good choices that they make. And I'm a really big fan, especially for Malamutes, for training throughout the day. Having as many opportunities throughout the day to reinforce good behavior, like 4 on the floor. You go up to say hi and they stay on the ground, you could give them a treat, right? Or going out the back door, you could ask them for a sit and then give them a cookie and then open the door. So there's little things we can do to reinforce good behavior throughout the day. But obviously management and control of the environment is really key, because when they rehearse a behavior, that behavior gets stronger. And sometimes that's a good thing if it's a behavior that we like, and sometimes not a good thing if it's a behavior that we don't want. So talk to us a little bit about some management that you use in home for your Malamutes, either when they're young or as adults, to help prevent unwanted behavior.
So a combination of things, and I absolutely agree that incorporating training into daily life is better and more realistic than setting aside certain times, certain days, so they know they have to behave between 10 a.m. and whatever, 10:30, 11 a.m. on Tuesdays, or it's part of daily life. I use crates, I use exercise pens, I use baby gates. I don't give them free run of the house. It's obviously dependent on the dog and the age, but puppies, if you give puppies free run, they're going to do puppy stuff. They're not going to be naughty. They're not going to be bad. They're just going to be puppies.
Yeah.
And, that may include forgetting to go out, even if you have a dog door, which I've never had in my life, but, forgetting to go to the bathroom outside, or going outside and playing and having a great time, and then coming in the house and realizing, oh my gosh, my bladder's full, and squatting, or peeing. It's going to include accidents and chewing things and doing normal puppy behaviors. So I want to structure and manage things where I'm preventing rehearsal practice of the unwanted behaviors and shaping, and focusing on things we like is important.
Yeah.
A lot of times pet owners forget to notice and reinforce, reward, acknowledge behaviors that they like or want to continue. It's like, it may even be, it depends on the dog. It may even be, hey, they're just settling, laying there, relaxing. They're not doing anything, but they're not doing anything naughty, what we'd call naughty. Acknowledge it. Don't wait until they do something wrong, something you don't like, don't want to, it ends up being attention. Sometimes they end up getting attention for behaviors that we don't like, and attention can equal reinforcement. And for some dogs, hey, they'll take the, attention for what we think, especially if you get into, scolding kind of stuff. And I don't do the no bad dog thing, but
yeah, I I love that. I think that oftentimes with my clients, when we have like a puppy or a teenager that they are working with, they're like, oh my God, he finally stopped barking. Like nobody disturbed the dog. He finally is still, and I'm like, what do you mean ignore the dog? I'm like, now is the time we need to pay attention to the dog.
Yeah.
Because they're running around, barking, full of energy, being silly. And we're like, hey, stop that. Hey, come do this. Hey, don't you want a toy? Right. And then the moment they do what we want more of, we're like, nobody disturbed the dog. And I think that can get us into a ton of trouble too, because then we're not paying the behavior that we want to see more of. We're not reinforcing that. So I like to walk around, especially if I've got a young dog in the house, with either a vest with some, food in the pockets, or a treat bag, or goodness, little treat stations around the house. And anytime I catch them doing something I like, nice job, and drop a cookie, right? Especially for that calm behavior, because Malamutes do have a ton of energy. And a lot of times for our puppies and teenagers, that off switch is not natural. We have to teach that, so
Right.
making sure that we are paying attention to our dogs when they're doing the right thing and paying them for it. I'm also, in terms of training, I'm really big on trying to be proactive instead of reactive. So a lot of the times, again, if we think of an adolescent Malamute, they've got a ton of energy. And if I don't give them appropriate outlets for that energy is still going to come out. It's just probably going to come out in ways that I don't really enjoy, like making noise and digging inside and running around and, digging in the yard and howling and all these kind of attention seeking or, energy releasing behaviors that I probably don't really like. And then we find ourselves having to, interrupt the dog and kind of get in their face a little bit more, where instead I like to try to encourage people, especially with our Malamutes, because they're so smart and they've got so much energy, try to give them outlets proactively. So if you notice that they get a little wound up in the evening, try to do some late afternoon activity with them. And then before you settle down for the evening, give them something to occupy them, like a chew or a frozen Kong or a puzzle toy to kind of help, get that energy out ahead of time, and then channel what might be left into something a little bit more relaxing for them, so that we're trying to help shape their behavior towards things that we want instead of just paying attention when they do something inappropriate.
Right. And anticipate, like you said, that's important. People say, oh, every night at 7 o'clock, my puppy gets the zoomies well, oh, you know what? That's great. If you know that it happens every night at 7, then how about at, whatever, at 6:30, at 6:45, let's do something different. Let's give them a stuffed Kong. Let's, give them something else to do and prevent what you don't want.
Yeah. Lots of people will use the phrase, positive is permissive. I like to say positive is not permissive. It does not mean that we're just ignoring these bad behaviors. We're being proactive with activities. We're reinforcing behaviors we do want. Of course, it's not a perfect world. And even for us dog trainers, we're going to look down and be like, what the heck? How did that just happen? Mistakes happen. Undesired behaviors happen. So how do we, in the moment, handle a mix-up? So let's say, for example, that, we turn around and our dog has picked up something inappropriate, like a paper towel or a kitchen towel off the counter, and they're running around and chewing on it. How do we, being positive trainers, kind of stop that behavior and change our own behavior so that it doesn't happen again?
Right. And sometimes we do need to be conscious of, if we want to change our dog's behavior, we've got to be willing to change our own behavior, right? Yeah. So depending what it is, obviously, sometimes you can, can just say something, kind of interrupt, redirect. But the example you gave is a great one. And stealing things is a complaint of many pet owners, stealing. And of course, in the dog's mind, possession is 100% the law. So once it's in their mouth, it's theirs. You didn't steal it; it's theirs. If you didn't want them to pick it up, why did you leave it sitting around? Yeah. But when it's something benign like a paper towel, some things we worry about. If it's something irreplaceable, fragile, breakable, dangerous, etc. But paper towel's a great one, because you don't have to think, oh my gosh, it's going to create a blockage, or he's going to get, sick, or, And when my dogs pick things up, my favorite thing to say is, wow, what have you got? Look at you. You are so smart. And, you know, I don't want them learning to run away from me or play keep away or guard it. Like, I know you're going to take it, I better protect it. That's a totally natural instinct. But, you know, I want them learning, you know, I'll actually kind of reinforce the picking things up. And people are like, well, that doesn't make any sense because I didn't want them to pick it up. And well, I need to do my job in managing the environment and preventing access to things that are dangerous or fragile or et cetera. And some dogs are more oral than others, of course. And so I'm going to work with those. I'm going to work very strongly on all components of you know, take it and hold and give and drop and leave it, because leave it is before they get it in the first place. But if they've already got it, to me, leave it, it's too late for leave it.
Right.
But I want dogs that bring me things that they pick up. I don't want them, like I say, playing keep away or learning to guard it. My little smooth fox terrier would bring, my husband would use toothpicks, which I always hated anyway. And then, so occasionally there'd be a toothpick on the ground. Well, the Malamutes might not even notice it, but the fox terrier, she picked up this little toothpick and she brings it to me because she learned that early on that, you know, if you find something, bring it to mom because you might get something in trade for it. And, you know, she's not going to get upset. She's going to go, wow, you are so smart. Look at you. You're brilliant. So, you know, she actually bring me a toothpick. And, you know, to deal with the husband later, but the dog, it's like, wow, that's awesome. And it doesn't, you know, in the way that I do it, it doesn't increase the amount of things that they grab and steal. But it does improve our relationship and get them comfortable bringing me things. I'm less worried about them something bad happening, like them swallowing a washcloth and getting a, you know, deadly or expensive surgery requiring blockage and so that's where I'm at on that.
Because in a lot of our, you know, Malamute pet groups on Facebook, you know, a lot of people are struggling with resource guarding, and some of that, of course, behavior is very complex, and some of it can be, you know, a little bit of a genetic component, and some of it can be early experiences they had before they get us. But of course, once they're with us, we want giving things to us to be the best thing ever. I never want my dog to pick something up or have something and feel threatened. And the way that we react in the moment, you know, if we're loud, if we're like, what did you get? What are you doing? What is that? You know, it could be something natural that just comes out of our mouth without us even realizing it, but that can negatively impact the dog's behavior. And then they're like, oh, you just got really stressed out. This is important to me. I do want this. I should avoid giving this back to you. You know, but I love your, what is that? Oh my gosh. You know, and then the dog's like, I know, isn't it cool? You know,
like,
and they
wow, you're so talented.
They're like, oh, thanks. And then they'll bring it to us, and it gives us the opportunity to trade them and to reinforce them for letting it go, you know, turning it into a game and bring it back to me instead of a game of this is mine and I'm going to run away with it and not let you have it back. I think that's huge, you know, and of course, changing our own behavior as humans can be really tough, but sometimes with training, that's what we have to do because ultimately we could accidentally be making the challenge worse with our dogs. So another common misconception about Malamutes is that they are working dogs and they could be dangerous if they don't follow a command. And again, that kind of goes into our alpha theory that we talked about a little bit earlier. But what are your thoughts on this? Because it's a comment that comes up quite a bit. You know, they're working dogs, they're tough dogs. They need to know that there are consequences.
Well, using fear, I mean, using fear does not eliminate the possibility of a dog refusing a command.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're dogs. First and foremost, they're dogs. And instinct can override the best training regardless of method. And I think we can also understand that Malamutes were historically bred to be thinkers and make decisions. So, I mean, the old sledding example is not taking the team out on the thin ice when the driver tells them to go a certain way and they know that it's dangerous and it's not the thing to do. So, we're choosing dogs that were kind of bred to disobey, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
There was something else related to this that I was going to check my cheat notes here. If you talk for a second on the subject, it'll probably trigger.
One thing that I really like to encourage people to do is to kind of rethink how they might perceive something. So, a lot of the times, again, we're talking about dogs that are very good at making choices. And I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about positive reinforcement training, is that we have the power to increase the frequency of certain choices. And that's one of my favorite things to do with my dogs. We can capture when they make a good choice and go, yes, and give them a treat for it or give them some kind of reinforcement for it. And if we increase the frequency of the good choices, we start to see less and less of the undesired choices. So while some people might think, well, gosh, this independent and thinking dog, is hard to deal with, I think, well, goodness, I'm so happy I have a dog that can make decisions on their own. Let me use my power of reinforcement to make their choices the ones that I also like. And it does require a little bit of training, but I think in the end, if you do it this way and use that positive reinforcement like that, you get a working dog that's even more connected with you, because you guys have that mutual level of understanding and trust.
Right. It's important for people to remember if they're seeing a behavior that's continuing or increasing, that it is being reinforced, whether they're intentionally doing it or it's just, the dog is rehearsing it and the dog is finding it rewarding. But if it's continuing or increasing, it's being reinforced.
Yeah.
And it's nice when we can actually purposely do that and say shape things.
Yeah, absolutely. So another common misconception about our Malamutes is that they are stubborn. So this is a phrase that is often used to describe our breed that drives me a little nuts, to be honest with you.
I've never seen them as stubborn. I don't know. No. I think stubborn is a word that people use for anything that doesn't blindly follow orders or and that's not what I'm looking for I mean, if it was, I wouldn't get a Malamute.
And I think that's stubborn too a lot of the times. I mean, if we're talking about the true, definition of being stubborn, it's that they're completely aware,
right,
and they totally understand all the consequences and are choosing not to do it. And that is really complex thinking. Right. That's something a human could certainly do, but for our dogs do what work. Dogs do what is reinforced. Yeah. And the reinforcement can come from us, and it can also come from the environment, right? It can come from a whole variety of things. But I think that oftentimes when people, my 15-week-old puppy is stubborn. No, he just doesn't understand what you want. Right. And that's okay. That's actually great information, but I think a lot of the times we will put labels on our dogs that will excuse behavior, but in reality, it's preventing us from really accomplishing things with them, when we put these labels on them. And instead, we should think, okay, he doesn't know this yet, or he doesn't know this in this environment with these, temperatures or with these distractions. And so instead, it's still great feedback. Oh, you can't sit here? Okay. And then you have to look around and say, what in this environment or what about this situation is too hard, so that you can then go back to the drawing board for training and figure out where we had that missing piece, so that you can put it back in,
Too often people think that their dogs are, willfully choosing to do these things just to make their life difficult.
Yeah. Do things out of spite. I see a lot. Oh, he was mad at me, so he went to my bed and peed. No, not quite how that works.
You know, their intelligence and creative thinking and self-serving nature and all that. I mean, that's a big part of what drew me to the breed. That I found, it obviously depends on the individual and our, you know, where we're at in our life. But I had my Golden, who was a wonderful, and she had a lot of issues. She was a rescue and she had a lot of issues, but she was a wonderful, sweet dog. But the Malamute was very different. So the Golden was my first performance dog, and the Malamute was my second performance dog. But, you know, he taught me so much, and they have each, you know, taught me so much. I'll wait until we get to that point. There's a couple of things that I wanted to share.
I think it's on the next thing that we have planned, which is kind of some of the differences, because I think too, if somebody is used to having dogs, but not used to having Malamutes, it can be easy for us to compare one dog to the other. I mean, I live in a multi-dog household. Dogs are the same breed. And even then you have to remember that you have to train the dog in front of you and not compare that dog to any other dog you've had. And it can be challenging for us to do, but it's really important, because then we're truly looking at behavior, right? And we're looking at how we're changing it and what needs to be changed and what I need to do to change that behavior. Even though the same learning theory applies, how we apply it specifically to each dog can change, you know? So one big example of that is the fact that Malamutes are not drill dogs. And I'm sure that that was something you experienced as a big difference between your Golden and your Malamute with performance work, you know, because a Golden could work, I'm sure, 20, 25 minutes easily.
I could just keep doing retrieves.
Your Malamute is like, bye, too much.
Yeah, I did it. Do you want me to do it again?
I know. Why are we doing this again? I already did it right 3 times.
Right.
So talk to us about a little bit about that concept of like being a drill dog and how that can be challenging for Malamutes, but how we can, you know, use that knowledge to our advantage while training them.
So, so I don't find them, you know, harder, more difficult to train than other breeds. Just some differences, like you say, that we need to be aware of. And I say that there's some of them are have less margin for error, less forgiving than some breeds. Just that with some breeds, I think you can actually maybe utilize some things that are not necessarily the best methods or ways to do things, but you can get away with it. And I don't know as though that works as well with Malamutes. Where are we?
So for Malamute, I would not consider them a drill dog. And so
drill dogs.
When I'm working with my Malamutes, you know, I'm keeping sessions really short. I'm doing 3 to 5 minutes at a time, you know, because if we work them any longer than that, you're going to start to see the quality of the behavior change. You're going to start to see them check out. They might start getting stressed. They might start offering other behaviors if they're confused. So I think that really, you know, making sure when you're working with your Malamutes that you're keeping sessions really, really short with them. And if you see them start to kind of check out, take a break. Even if it's before that 5-minute time that you had set aside, you know, it's important to remember that the behavior you're reinforcing, you're going to get more of. So if I'm reinforcing something that's not ideal, you know, because the dog's getting tired, well, I'm increasing the frequency of that, and that might not be what I'm looking for.
Right. And depending what you're doing, and I mean, sometimes I measure by time and sometimes I measure by repetitions, you know, depending what you're doing and depending how old the dog is, depending if it's a, you know, 12-week-old puppy or a 2-year-old adult or, but in general, yes, I'd say less is more with Malamutes. I discovered with my first Malamute that if I asked him to repeat a behavior that he had just demonstrated correctly, there was a good chance that he'd change something about it. Now, did he assume that he must have done it wrong the first time? So, you know, did he think that hard that he, or was it just boredom? But the point was, I learned, you know, whereas like specifically talking about like a formal dumbbell retrieve, obedience retrieve, you know, with my Golden, I could just do, she was also a retriever, but that doesn't always mean they're natural retrievers. You know, I've encountered retrievers that are not natural retrievers. But with a Malamute, you know, I had to figure out those numbers and go, okay, because I do want to do performance with this dog. I do want to compete with him. And I need him to do it for the amount of repetitions or duration that I need him to do it in the ring eventually. So I want him comfortable with more than that. And I need him to understand that just because I ask you to do it again, doesn't mean you did anything wrong the first time.
Yeah. And I think too, in terms of drills, you know, when we're talking about it, a lot of people will, when they go to practice sit, will practice sit the same way over and over, you know, and it's like Malamutes are so smart that gets boring, you know, and like you said, like they start to change the behavior. So what I like to do as well in those early learning stages is to go, okay, you just got, you know, 4 out of 5 repetitions brilliantly. Right? So the next time I go to do it, I'm going to change something small about it. And it could be as small as me practicing sit in a different room in the house, or clipping a leash on and practicing my sits on the deck, right? New environment, new surface. But I think that trying to find ways to constantly change just a little sliver also helps keep it interesting for the dog, because it changes that setup a little bit. You know, and if we do it that way too, we truly are developing stronger behaviors, because we're working on those distractions. We're working on, you know, the distance and the duration, instead of just practicing the same thing over and over and over, which will get really boring for them.
I think healing used to be a big thing, that because some classes used to like, you know, heal their dogs for practically the whole hour. And boy, if that isn't boring, I don't know what is. So, you know, I mean, when I'm teaching healing, you know, little bits and pieces, do a little bit, you know, take a break, you know, play, taking a break between teaching things, just to play or do something like that. And I can, you know, work with them for a longer period of time, taking little breaks in between.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important too, actually, that concept of a break, because oftentimes, not all, but oftentimes I find that a toy drive is not something that comes really natural to many Malamutes. Again, there are always the exceptions, but remember too, that play can be taught. You know, we can teach toy drive, we can build toy drive. So if I'm going to a 60-minute obedience class where even if the rest of the dogs are doing all that healing, I'm not. You know, I bring a little toy and we play catch. I'll do some hand targets and have the dog jump up and target to different places and turn it into body play. You know, I'm finding ways to go, okay, even though your Border Collie and your Lab and your Shepherd might be able to do this, I know that my dog can't. So we're still going to get all those benefits of being in class and practicing in that environment, but I'm going to take a step back and kind of make sure that I'm really breaking those work segments into smaller pieces where the dog can thrive.
Right. And you need a class and an instructor who understands and appreciates that and has no problem with, I mean, I will only go to classes that will allow me to do these little things on the sidelines. I'm not interrupting anybody. I'm not, you know, making a scene. I'm not, you know, disturbing the other students. I'm not going to do, you know, every bit of everything that they're doing with their dogs, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of along that concept, another thing that I see pop up quite a bit in our Malamute pet groups is that people will say, my dog's not food motivated, my dog's not toy motivated. One thing that I always like to encourage everybody to do is add a yet at the end of that. My dog is not food motivated yet. My dog is not toy motivated yet, because eating, working for food, and playing with toys are all behaviors. and behaviors can be taught. Behaviors can be strengthened. It might take a little bit longer to get, your Malamute, your performance Malamute, to tug on a tug toy than maybe your Golden. But it's still a behavior that can be taught. So a lot of the times we might see in some of those pet groups, people being stressed or concerned about their dog not really having that drive. So what are your tips for that, Mary, in terms of working on that, navigating that?
My fourth Malamute is actually my first one who would equally, I was so impressed, go back and forth in agility between food rewards and play rewards. Now, I've always had, I've been able to get them to play, but it's like, once you bring out the food rewards, the boys, maybe that's it. Maybe it's because the first three were boys. And the fourth one was a girl. And, but that just blew me away when I could do the food rewards for maybe, on the contact, but then still pull out a tug toy, and then she would go for it, after a jump, and then tug in place. Like, oh my gosh, she'll go back and forth between food and toy. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And that's more challenging, the back and forth thing. But my general thinking, when people say their dog isn't food motivated, my thoughts are something's wrong. I mean, there's some, they're overfed. Maybe they're free feeding, so they aren't controlling, when and how much the dog is eating. The dog is probably eating too much. They need food for survival.
Yeah.
Or in training, they're using maybe it's a high distraction environment, and they're using kibble, and the dog is like, and they're not using high value food. The dog is under too much stress. There's something going on.
Yeah.
If your dog isn't food motivated, something is happening. I have always fed my dogs on a schedule, a measured amount. It's very important to me to keep their weight healthy. I want them to live long, healthy lives, and, not stress their joints any more than necessary. And so years ago, I used to tell students to, if they wanted to work on getting their dogs, and this is flipping over to the toy part of it, but using food, so dogs that are food driven but not toy driven, we used to talk about making a food sock. Well, these days you can buy toys that have Velcro pouches and openings where you can put squeakers in, or you can put food in, or so you can buy toys these days. Years ago, it was like, make a food sock, you can put some food in the sock, and but you can do it with a toy. And if your dog is food driven and not toy driven, and you're working on building the toy drive, then I'll have a special toy, and it's a special toy, so it isn't just left on the ground for the dog to access anytime. What's exciting about that? It's an interactive training toy. It's for the two of us to play with together, and so when it's not in use, it's put up somewhere out of reach. Maybe it's on the fridge. The toy has a special name, so when we walk by, we talk about it. And once in a while, we get Blinky off the fridge, and we play a little bit. And the type of play, it's like, I find a lot of dogs wiggling a toy in like a number 8 pattern, kind of wiggling it on the ground back and forth, like kind of try to trigger that prey drive. Look like a little critter, kind of wiggle, shake. Can't see my hand, but
I gotcha.
Like a number 8 pattern, wiggle, shake it on the ground. And I mean, if you get them pouncing on it once, awesome. And then in this case, maybe you're going to open the Velcro pouch and let them grab a bite of a treat out of it. And you're going to keep sessions short. You're going to, build on success. And you're going to keep the toy out of reach and that kind of thing. So building toy drive, and building the food drive. Like I say, there's something If you don't think they are food driven,
There's
you
something
need to
else they're valuing.
discuss with
Yeah.
somebody with an experienced professional what might actually be going on or what you're missing.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up, food value and stress in the environment, because that's one of the things as a trainer that I see the most often, is that a behavior like attention on cue or a hand target or leash walking is tough. It hasn't been taught in low distraction environment, and then someone brings kibble to the park and tries to do it, and you're like, this isn't going to work. When we're talking about all the different distractions that are around our dogs outside, a lot of the times just sitting watching those is more reinforcing than a treat value that we might have. So I always say, okay, if your dog isn't eating here, where can your dog eat? Right? So if I'm outside and I've got a really low value, maybe crunchy treat, and my dog doesn't want it, I go, okay, can you eat this inside? And my dog goes, I can. And so that's where I start. That's where I need to start working on teaching attention, teaching loose leash walking inside, in the living room, right? And we practice it there so that the dog knows what I want and starts to figure out, okay, when they say this, I do this and I get paid. And once those behaviors get easier for the dog, then we start to reevaluate the different environments that the dog might be able to work in. And oftentimes I'm really increasing that treat value when I move to those more distracting or stressful environments. Keeping a really close eye on the dog body language as well, because a dog that is distracted and interested looks really different than a dog that is overwhelmed and stressed out in their environment. But oftentimes those small body language changes can be hard to identify if you're not trained how to do it. So there's some great videos online by Modern Dog Training that will show you different dog signaling and communication in action. So if you need to learn how to read your dogs, you can check those out. But it's so important for us to be able to look at behavior without putting those labels on of being stubborn. No, it's just a really tough environment and my food sucks, right? My dog doesn't want it. So I got to really figure
out. And they're not fluent at the behavior to begin with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, just because you're fluent and they may not even be fluent in the living room, but if they're fluent in the living room, then okay, then the next step, let's, take it outside, take it in the backyard. It depends on where you're at, but take it in your backyard where there, maybe you have a 6-foot privacy fence. So it's not as bad as your front yard. And then you take it in the front yard, and then you take it down the street and you take it to the park. Exactly. And like you say, if you're increasing some of the distractions and other things, then you're going to be increasing your food value as well.
Yep. Finding out where the dog can be successful and working from there, slowly increasing the distractions or changing that environment.
So building on success.
Exactly. We've had a few questions that have come in while we've been chatting, so I'm going to pop some of them up on our screen so that we can talk about them. So this is one actually that's pretty common. I've seen this pop up in a few different groups. Tina says, my 8-month-old gets aggressive over food, but only with our oldest dog. Even our little dog can eat with him. Why does he do this? And do I just keep feeding separately? So the first thing that I would say is, if we're having issues in a multi-dog household, it's always a good idea to avoid the triggers that cause a negative response. So if we have dogs that are uncomfortable around each other when food is around, then we definitely want to use that management of separation to prevent the dogs from having an issue, because every time there's an issue, we are, tearing away at their relationship, increasing the chances of that behavioral challenge to get worse. What do you think, Mary?
Also, we're talking about an 8-month-old, right? So young adolescent, it's adolescence. A lot of times the dogs are getting bigger by that point, and pet owners tend to think, oh, it's like a grown up, and no. He or she has an adolescent brain, and it's still a really important time to utilize plenty of structure and management to shape desired behavior, prevent unwanted things from happening. And like you say, you don't want to undermine those relationships between the dogs and have it to where they can never get along. And, for the few minutes that they're eating a couple times a day, if they're eating out of bowls, the separation isn't usually that big of a deal. And it's going to allow you to prevent the food aggression. And a lot of people will say, food guarding towards other dogs is not an abnormal behavior. I don't want to put my dogs in the position where they think they need to guard their food, or they're worried about, another dog coming up. And it's not appropriate to be walking up to a dog eating at their bowl.
Right.
So management for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things that management's easy to do for. Crates or baby gates or X pens, you can really easily teach dogs to go to place, so before you even go and get the food, all the dogs could have gone to their separate areas. And it's a really easy way to just prevent a challenge from getting worse. And if it's something where, Tina, you want more help on it, make sure you reach out to a certified professional trainer who is experienced with behavior modification training, and they can help give you, some more in-person assistance with that. But definitely in the meantime, at least manage.
We don't want anxiety associated with meal times.
Right.
So hopefully, if over time you continue to manage it properly, hopefully the young dog will actually get more relaxed and more comfortable and realize that she doesn't have to guard her food. And I agree with you. I think sometimes pet owners maybe underestimate or don't realize the amount of help, guidance, personalized input they could get from an experienced professional. And it's different than generic, things you see on social media, generic stuff. But when they're working one-on-one with you personally, it should be directed towards your case and your dog and what's happening. And there should be lots of questions and suggestions, and they should make sense. And
Yep. All right, we've got a question here. Hello from Romania. Thank you for joining us. I was wondering how much you can and should walk a Malamute that's about 1.5 years old. So I definitely like to make sure growth plates are closed before we do a lot of impact stuff. With my younger guys, I'm doing a lot of like long line walks where they get to choose the pace and they get to kind of choose the distance a little bit more. We're doing more stopping and sniffing. We're not adding any weight or any pulling until those growth plates are closed. Generally, anywhere between 1 to 2 years, they can be closed, but it definitely depends on the different lines. But as long as the dog is enjoying it and wanting to move forward, if it's slow and steady on soft surfaces, then, 1.5 years, you should be okay to do quite a bit of work with them.
Yep. And it says walking. It doesn't say, jogging or biking or walking and dependent on surface.
Yeah. Softer surfaces.
Pounding the pavement or out on trails. But, if I was walking on, if I had access to, dirt trails and stuff, my 1.5-year-olds would be doing miles and miles and miles.
Yeah. Yep. They are active dogs for sure. Got a question here from Julianne. Our current Mal is 6. We've had her since she was a puppy. She tends to be dog aggressive towards other dogs, even though she was raised in home with another Malamute who has since passed. How do we help her greet other dogs nicely?
Does she need to greet them? I mean, that's probably an unpopular theory. I personally have no need for my dogs to greet strange dogs. I want my dogs comfortable around dogs in the world. And so I want to prevent traumatic experiences. I've learned that people don't always know when their dogs are friendly. And I can't tell you how many times I've had been out with my dogs on leash and had, off leash dogs approaching us and people saying, oh, he's friendly.
Yeah.
And they come up in my leash dog's face and growl at my dog, and my dog's not thrilled about that. And so I don't have, and I want my dogs can compete off leash around other dogs, but those are also trained dogs that are focused on what they're competing in or focused on their handler. And my dogs don't just run up to other dogs. So if I know a person and know a dog and know that they are temperamentally compatible with my dog, I teach an authorized greeting, whether they're greeting a person or a dog. I like to say, go say hi or something like that. So I'm authorizing it where they don't just think it's appropriate to run up to anybody. So I authorize it, go say hi. And you need to kind of understand watch your dog's body language, the other dog's body language, and keep it brief. Something that I see a lot of times, and when I was teaching group classes, I'd see students like let their dogs say hi, and it was funny, and they, as soon as like the dogs would go nose to nose, they're like, oh, he's fine, or she likes him, or they get along. It's like, okay, now call your dogs back, just use their name, don't yank them away, just call them back, call them to the owner and reward them. That was awesome. And then maybe go say hi again and call them back. But a lot of times, if the dogs don't really know each other, they'll greet and things will be okay. And then as they're close together, they'll start to get a little anxious, and things can go real quick to where suddenly somebody is showing what, we might call aggression.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think that in our society too, especially here in the United States, everybody loves their dogs, everybody. And people want their dogs to be loved by others, and we want our dogs to be social and have friends. But I think it's also important to look at the dog and see what the dog wants and needs, and so if a dog is displaying aggressive or reactive behavior towards other dogs when we're out walking, then our dog probably doesn't really want those greetings.
Right.
And it's also important, if that reactive behavior of barky, lungy, pulley at the end of the leash is based in frustration. If my dog is, goes to dog parks and goes to play with other dogs and does really well, but is displaying that behavior on leash, and it's okay, he's friendly. Well, he might be friendly, but it's still not appropriate to let that dog who is social greet after displaying that behavior. Because if excitement, frustration, stress, arousal is that high that my dog is, showing those signals, then even if my dog is social, that greeting is not going to go well. So I think it's important to look at the dog in front of you and be able to say, okay, we might not want that greeting. And at the very least, like you said, Mary, teaching them how to ignore those other dogs or ignore those distractions is huge, so that we're at least able to pass other dogs, because we don't want our dogs to be stressed, to live in a stressful world. And if we're experiencing that type of behavior when we go out on walks, then our dog's living with a lot of stress. So, we work on look at that, look at me, engage, disengage, to help teach the dogs that turning around and checking in with me is better than staring at the other dogs, and kind of change emotionally how they feel when they're in the presence of other dogs. But I think for a dog that is dog reactive or dog aggressive, that's always my first priority, is let's make sure we can still go out and do the things we want to safely without the dog experiencing a bunch of stress. And then in terms of actual greetings with our dogs, once training is accomplished and our dogs are social, leash greetings can be really tough because the dogs approach each other head to head, and that's really stressful. And you're right, Mary, that the longer they linger there in each other's space, the more likely we are to kind of have something bad. So we start with parallel walks, and when body language is neutral, then it's go say hi, 1, 2, okay, let's go. And we pay them for moving in the other direction, so that lingering doesn't cause any kind of stress or tension with them.
Parallel walking is excellent, an excellent way to get dogs more comfortable. And you might parallel walk for, every day for weeks before they actually greet. Depends on the dogs and situation. And
so
like you said,
if you have friends
like you say,
that have dogs, planning a weekly outing so that the dogs can get comfortable, you know, at a distance, parallel walking, they'll start to become more familiar and comfortable with that dog.
The dogs will appreciate that.
Yes. Yes, they will. Well, Mary, we've got a ton of questions here that unfortunately we would love to be able to spend all day with you guys, but we cannot. I'll keep an eye on this thread, and Mary, maybe you can keep an eye on it too, and we can kind of get some answers to some of the people whose questions we didn't get to live. For resources for you guys, before we head out, I want to offer you a few ways. Of course, you can follow us at Pawsitive Futures. You can follow Mary over at Modar Dog Training. I included a link to her Facebook page, so you guys can follow her over there. If you guys are looking for a certified professional dog trainer, we really do recommend somebody who has some sort of professional certification. So something like the Karen Pryor Academy, the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, somebody that has basically like some letters at the end of their name is a good place to start, and to interview them. Make sure that they are a good fit for you and your family. The Karen Pryor Academy and dogwise.com are excellent resources for you in terms of books, and DVDs. If you guys want to learn about some more specific topics, there's some really nice positive reinforcement and clicker training resources on those two websites. And then of course,
are you familiar with Tawser Dog?
Yeah, Tawser Dog, yes. Yep, that would be another excellent resource. I can include a link for that in the description as well for you guys. And then Mary is an awesome contributing member over in our Facebook group too, Alaskan Malamute Training, which is all positive reinforcement training methods. So if you guys want to head over and follow us there, we've got some resources uploaded into the group to help you guys further your relationship with your dog using humane and effective training methods. Any last parting words, Mary? Anything else that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I guess not. You're going to have to direct me on how to find this to.
I sure will. I'll send you a link so that it's easy for you to follow, so that we can, because we've got a bunch of comments in here that I want to be sure that we can connect with everybody. So we'll be sure to follow up with you. And if you're watching a recording of this, feel free to drop those comments in as well if we didn't cover it, and we'll try to get you guys some good resources. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We had a nice, big live audience, which is fantastic. Lots of people who want to better their relationship with their Malamute, which I know, Mary, you appreciate that as well. So,
Absolutely.
Mary, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your day for this.
Thank you. Well, it's a subject we could talk for
forever. Maybe we'll need a follow-up at some point. All right. Thank you, everybody.